So Lu, would you just start by telling us your full name and the date you were born and where you were born?
Yes, I was born March 10th, 1923, in El Paso, Texas, on the border with Mexico.
And we know you as Lu, but what's your full name? It's not, Lu is kind of your name that you go by, but you have a longer name.
It's Lucietta.
Lucietta, it's a beautiful name. Mm-hmm. And tell us how old you are now and where you live now.
Well, I think you'll have to figure it because I don't really know how old I am. I think I'm about 90.
I think that's correct. I think you're about 89 and 4/5 or something.
Something like that. I think so. Yeah.
That your next birthday in March will be 90?
Yes, I think so. 1923.
And what city do you live in now?
What is the name of the city?
It's not El Paso, Texas, that's for sure.
No, it's not El Paso, Texas anymore. You know, I found myself blocking on this the other day for a pretty good reason.
That you were living in Berkeley for many, many years, but
yes.
Relatively recently, what, 7, 8 years ago?
7 or 8 years ago.
Santa Rosa area?
Yes.
Yeah. Why don't you move your chair up to there so you pick up the mic a little bit?
Oh, okay.
Because your voice comes in here too, I assume.
Yeah. So currently
so I am listening to Santa Rosa. Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. So one thing that I am totally fascinated by and wishing that you will tell us about is that I understand that you played a very central role in the desegregation of the Berkeley public schools in 1964 to 68, that era. Is that correct?
Yes. Well, of course, I was delighted to be there at that particular time. And it was one of the most interesting events during all the years that I've worked in the Berkeley schools to find the white hillside kids being integrated with the largely black kids who lived on the flats. And this involved the integration of the teachers, which in the long run seemed even more of a challenge than the children. And I was particularly involved in the early part of the integration because the principal at the school, Franklin School, which is a West Berkeley school, largely mixed black, went with his family. He had planned it long ahead, and he went with his family to Europe that summer and left me as principal of the school. So I had the exciting opportunity to be directly involved in helping to organize the teachers and the parents and the children preparing for integration that fall. And I had a wonderful time doing that.
How did the school integration come to happen? It sounds like it was a long process and a long struggle around it. And would you be able to tell us a little more about that, about the schools were completely segregated before this happened?
Well, they were completely segregated because of geography and socioeconomic facts. I think. I mean, I'm not sure how it started, but it certainly continued to exist because of the socioeconomic the fact that it was certainly the less expensive housing was in the flats, and it cost more to buy houses in the hills. So the hills were white, and the flats were black. I mean, in general, you know, obviously there was some mixture, but that was it pretty much. So because of that, the schools were also were segregated.
And were the teachers segregated as well? Were there black teachers at black schools and white teachers at white
I don't
schools?
know statistically, you know, what the percentage of black teachers was. I would think that there were probably, at that time, far more white teachers than black, and that pretty much the teachers were segregated.
What kind of opposition did you run into?
Well, it seemed to me, the opposition, at the time at least, and I think in retrospect too, the most difficult problem was with the teachers, because it wasn't their idea necessarily to integrate, but the fact was that they didn't have any choice, because the Board of Education had determined that was what was going to happen. And these are some of them long-time, old-fashioned teachers, and they may or may not have been interested in wanting integration. But they didn't have any choice. You know, there had been, I mean, we had made efforts in the process, of course, to try to do an educational job with teachers as well as parents and children. I mean, there had been huge efforts to try to bring the whole group along. But when you're dealing sometimes with embedded prejudice, it's not easy. And my impression was that it was harder with the teachers even than with most of the parents.
Did you have a lot of resistance from the parents about integrating the schools?
I think that for the most part, the parents were, the Berkeley type hillside parents were completely, not only completely, but militantly interested in desiring integration. And the parents were, you know, were somewhat mixed, and the teachers also were a mixture, both in the hill schools and on the flats.
You mentioned the Board of Education, the school board. Were they the driving force that kind of led this, or was it from within the schools, the teachers, the parents, and others?
Well, I believe that it actually was the school board. I remember going to meetings of the Board of Education before this happened, and the whole thing was it seemed to me springing from them, that they were dedicated to the idea that the school should surely be integrated.
Could you say a little more about your role in the whole process? Because it sounds like that process went on for several years.
Well, we continued to have meetings of various kinds to help to increase the understanding between the two groups, the parents, the children, the teachers, the whole thing, and to try to deal with the problems as they came up, and you know, with the kids too, because the children were clearly having to make big changes.
How did the children handle it? Were they distressed at being sent to a different neighborhood, or were they pretty cooperative with it all?
As I remember it, the children didn't have a big issue with it. I think that they took to the idea, you know, that they were probably swayed, at least to some extent, by the attitudes of the parents and the teachers. And I don't remember huge, particularly, you see, we should remember that I am really talking about the elementary school children and teachers and the whole set, the elementary school teachers, because I don't know a lot, I know very little about what went on the secondary level. I mean, of course, I know talking to teachers, talking to parents, talking to kids, but I didn't really, that wasn't my focus, and I really was not that aware, and certainly not that involved.
That your involvement was with the elementary school?
Yes, yeah. So I really am not at all clear about exactly what happened in the junior high and high school. Yeah.
I remember years ago you showing me a picture, the front page of a newspaper from that era, where there's a picture of you holding the hand of a small black child.
Sounds like me.
Crossing the threshold to the school for the first day of school.
Oh boy.
Was that Franklin School?
Well, Franklin is a flat school, a school in the flats. So it was one of the hill schools.
I see.
I don't know which one.
And Franklin School was where you were the
Yes.
Principal during that time, or
Yes.
were taking over
Just
that
before
job?
that time, yes. Yeah.
Growing up in a border town influence your desire to help make sure that Berkeley schools were integrated?
I didn't hear what you said.
Did growing up in a border town?
I didn't grow up in a border town.
Oh, you were born, but you didn't grow up.
Yeah, I was born in El Paso, Texas, but when I was 6 months old, my entire Mexican family having seen the orange crates from California, decided that it would be a much better place to live. And so the entire family migrated to East Los Angeles.
Could you tell us more about your family, your parents, and your whole family background?
Well, my father was from the South. He came from Atlanta, Georgia, and he was in his 60s. He owned a hotel in El Paso, and my mother, who was a 16-year-old Mexican girl, met him when she was doing secretarial work in downtown El Paso. And they were married. He had had a family in Georgia, fully grown. I don't know, probably he was a grandfather by then. I don't really know that. I know nothing about his previous family. And so she was 17 when I was born, and he was like 62.
Wow.
It was not a successful marriage, obviously.
And you were 6 months old when you left, your family left for California. Where did you go in California?
We went to where the rest of the Mexicans went, East Los Angeles,
Uh-huh.
which at that time was a lot like Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
The lot of Spanish
Mm-hmm.
every place, and chicharrones and Spanish spoken in the Catholic Church.
Mm-hmm.
And,
And how long did you stay in Los Angeles?
well, I stayed in Los Angeles living with my grandmother in East Los Angeles because my mother was working. And I'm not sure how. One of my mother's sisters, well, in the first place, we have to go to my grandmother, who, of course, had been raised as a Catholic. And she, for whatever reasons, converted to Methodism. And one of my aunts became a Methodist deaconess, which is who are like Catholic nuns.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And she went to a training school for deaconesses and missionaries, Methodist deaconesses and missionaries, in, of all places, Kansas. And she was working in a mission in a Mexican community in Kansas at the time when I was about 4 years old. And I had been living in East Los Angeles with my grandmother because my mother was working.
Mm-hmm.
My mother and father had very early been separated.
Mm-hmm.
And my father apparently saw my mother's wayward life and decided that she would not be a good mother, and persuaded her and my grandmother to have me go to live with my auntie in Kansas, in this Mexican community in Kansas.
This was in Kansas City?
Uh-huh.
And there was a Mexican community that was part of Kansas City?
Well, it had developed because in the First World War, well, it's right next to a Santa Fe train center.
Uh-huh.
And during the First World War, they needed workers because all the men had gone to war. So they went to Mexico and got workers and brought them to the Santa Fe Railroad station where they had all the construction.
In Kansas City?
In Kansas City. And that became a tiny Spanish-speaking Mexican community in the midst of all places, Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
And the Methodists saw this as a good place to pick up souls.
Uh-huh.
So they established this Methodist mission there in this unlikely spot with my auntie and another missionary who spoke, of course my auntie spoke Spanish in order to relate to all the Spanish-speaking people who had come up from Mexico during the First World War. So it had become a little Mexican community plopped in the middle of Kansas, right next to the Santa Fe Railroad.
I remember you showing me a photo a long time ago of your Aunt Isabella,
Isabel, uh-huh.
And the lady you called your Aunt Kathy.
Yes.
She was your aunt's co-worker or partner?
Yes, she was my wonderful other auntie, who was just as dear to me as my quote-unquote real auntie, yes.
And they were both deaconesses?
And they were both deaconesses in the Methodist Church, which is comparable to sisters in the Catholic Church.
And they lived there together in the mission?
And they lived on the second floor of the mission. The first floor on Sundays was used as a nursery school church. And during the week, it was a nursery school. It was a nursery school. And my auntie taught the nursery school, had the nursery school there. And in the afternoons during the week, it was a community center for school-aged children. There was a huge playground with swings and other playthings.
And you lived with the two aunties at the mission?
Yes, and so I lived with my two aunties at the mission for about 4 or 5 years. And those were the most wonderful years of my young life, because well, it was a wonderful place to be right in the center of the community center. And then on Sunday mornings, a preacher would come and we'd sing hymns, and that was fun. And it was a great time for a child. And when I was ready to go to school, I went over the Santa Fe Railroad tracks on a viaduct to a school in the other part of town.
When you say the other part of town, do you mean more the Anglo part of town?
Yeah, the non-Mexican type, because on our side were only the Mexican children.
It sounds like it's literally on the other side of the railroad tracks.
Literally,
Oh.
yes, literally, yes.
It was sounding there were a lot of Mexican Methodists in Kansas City. Is that
Well, I suppose there's some left. I don't know.
right? I mean, at that time.
Oh, at that time. Well, in that little community, so, some were Methodist and some went over the viaduct to the Catholic Church.
If I'm remembering this photo that you showed me many years ago, the two aunties were wearing some kind of very distinctive deaconess costume with a black
Yes.
hat and a cape or something.
Yeah.
And they were standing by a car. They had some kind of a big car. Am I remembering that correctly?
A big car.
Didn't they have some kind of...
Well, they had a car, a wonderful car, but I thought my memory, of course, as a child, I probably didn't even know what brand of car it was, but my memory is that it was something like a beat-up old Model A.
Ah.
It was that period.
And what was the costume? I shouldn't say costume,
Well,
the uniform.
they had
that they
the garb, and it was black, and then there was, it was a takeoff on the Catholic Church's garb, habit. And they had a high white collar and white cuffs, and the rest of it was black. And they had this wonderful hat, which is sort of a triangular, a little triangular hat about that big, and it was plopped on top of their heads, of course, and then there was a very pretty band, white band that came down, and in a great big, I have pictures, not that I can find them, but I have pictures of them, of white, sort of a heavy ribbon coming down here, and then this big bow. I mean, it's very ancient and kind of funny looking to us, but it was certainly a takeoff as a Catholic garb. Meantime, my father had died, and my mother had remarried, and chose to have me join her in Los Angeles.
Uh-huh.
So I left what had been heaven to me
Mm-hmm.
and went to live with my mother in Los Angeles.
What was the relationship of the aunts? Were they?
Her sister. They were sisters.
But between the two of them, were they involved?
Hmm?
Your Aunt Isabel and Aunt Kathy. Your Aunt Kathy was not your biological aunt.
She
was
wasn't
another deaconess.
my biological
No,
aunt.
I got that. That's why I'm asking. Were they?
Were they
a couple?
lesbians?
Oh no! Oh, heaven forbid!
Oh.
They were
You sound like it.
they were terribly, but they called
They were deaconesses.
they were deaconesses. My auntie called my Aunt Cassie Poppy.
Puppy?
Poppy.
Poppy.
Poppy. But they were not lesbians. I can tell you they would have been horrified to even hear you mention the word. No, they definitely were not, I can tell you, because, you know, the bedrooms were close. And
Yeah.
no, I mean, that's the farthest. Probably neither one of them really had any idea of what even the meaning of the word. You know, they were so pure.
But deaconesses, they were like nuns to remain single and chaste, or was that
Yes.
just, that was the idea that they were supposed?
Yeah,
to
they were
be-
all supposed to. They were supposed
They
to
weren't
remain.
supposed to marry or anything.
No.
Ah.
But then my auntie fell in love with a young man who was in the community,
Ah.
and she left Methodism and went.
She left the church altogether.
Well, I don't think she really left the church.
Just the deaconess.
But she
task.
left. She had to give up her garb, and
Oh.
she was no longer a deaconess because they were virginal.
She had to give up that cool hat and everything.
Yeah, and the little bow
Mhm.
under her chin. Yeah.
So
So
when you moved back to Los Angeles, you were living with your mother or your grandmother?
well, see, my mother had remarried,
Mm-hmm.
and I lived with her, and that was a very. It could not have been a more different experience.
Mm. What was she like? Or what was the experience like of living with your mother?
I probably will start to block on all of this. Well, it was like jumping from heaven into hell.
Oh.
There was heavy drinking,
Mm.
which I hadn't known, experienced, or seen at all.
Mm-hmm.
And on the other hand, her husband is an awfully nice guy.
Uh-huh.
And he did some things that were fun for a child,
Uh-huh.
and was just very, very kind.
Mm-hmm.
What years were this?
Well, I guess we'd have to start with when I was born in 23.
And what years would you
You
in
were
Los
sort of
Angeles?
around second grade or so.
I must have been in about the second grade.
About 8 years old.
About 8, so 8 and 23 would be 30.
And did you stay in Los Angeles the rest of your childhood?
Yes, yes.
You mentioned having a very close relationship with your mother's mother, your maternal grandmother.
Yes, there are several very important people to me in my life, and certainly those two women in the mission,
Mhm.
my Aunt Belle and my Aunt Cassie, were with me throughout their lives,
Mhm.
and I was with both of them, each of them, when she died.
Oh.
Yeah. One came to be with me. Aunt Belle came to live with me when she knew she was dying. She had lived in Arizona, and Aunt Cassie was in the Los Angeles area. So I was with each of them
Oh,
at the time of her death.
wow.
And my grandmother continued to live in East Los Angeles, and was always, she lived just across kind of a country street in East Los Angeles from the Japanese farms. And she had my grandfather had long ago died when I was still a baby. I didn't really know him, although there are pictures of him carrying me, but holding me, but and she was living with a wonderful man, living in sin with a wonderful man whose name was Pascual. And he would allow me to, I would spend a lot of weekends with her. And she lived in this wonderful place, which was in the middle of East Los Angeles, just across the unpaved street from the Japanese farms. And
Were those flower farms? Or were they vegetable
well,
and fruit farms?
they're both, but
Oh.
but one of the nearby ones was an enormous flower farm, and she would give me 15 cents, and Pascual and I would go across the road to the farm, to the flower farm, and buy 15 cents worth of the wonderful flowers, and we'd come back with an enormous, wonderful bouquet. And he had some kind of an illness, some kind of a smallpox.
Wow.
It was in the days when people had that, and before they knew how not to have it. And he would let me burn a cork. My grandmother lived in this little 2-room hut. It really was. It was a wonderful little place. Just one, the walls were just one sheets of wood. No, most walls have several layers. But it was Los Angeles kind of weather. And she had kerosene lamps and a wood stove and only cold running water. And he would allow me to burn a cork and then paint his face with mustache. And he was bald and he was pockmarked. So we'd all just laugh and laugh and laugh at how funny he looked with his mustache, and he was a wonderful man. Well, he was picked up by the LA cops for selling pot and put in the Los Angeles City County jail. And we went to visit him there. And he died in the LA jail.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was he elderly?
Well, I suppose he was around my grandmother's age.
Oh. Wow.
I don't think he was. I was a young child. I mean, by that time I was, probably around 9 or 10. The streetcars were very inexpensive, so that even though we were all quite poor, I could get a couple of nickels, I think it was, to get on the streetcar from where we lived to East Los Angeles, where my grandmother lived.
Uh-huh.
And I did that frequently for the weekends. But the place where she lived was wonderful, despite the fact that it was this two little room place, because it was like a miniature farm. And in the back where she had goats and ducks and chickens, and in the front.
Hello.
Hi.
Just checking on you. Do you need me to do anything for you?
I think have everything is okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
That's
Delayed reaction.
Sweetie is a little late. Minguita. Vente. Okay. Sweetie.
So she had ducks, chickens, and what else did she have?
She had chickens and ducks and a
Goats?
couple of goats.
Oh.
And from time to time, Pascual would butcher a goat, and he'd have the goat hanging in the backyard and cleaning it, and cleaning. Then we'd have this heavenly food.
Oh.
I mean, it sounds terrible, but it didn't seem to faze me. I don't know. It was.
Goat is a delicacy in a lot of places.
Well, it was pretty delicious, and my grandmother's Mexican cooking was wonderful, and East Los Angeles had all kinds of wonderful Mexican stores like chicharrones, that had wonderful different Mexican foods.
And what's the meaning of chicharrones? What does that mean?
It's there's an English word for it. It's what is that word?
It's a type of store, though?
No, it's it's pig, pork.
Oh, it's a type of food.
Chitlins?
Chitlins.
Chitlins,
It's not exactly chitlins, but it's chicharrones. I'm trying to remember the English name for it.
Pork rind?
Yeah, it's pork rind. It's pork rinds.
Uh-huh.
But there's another name for pork rinds. But anyway, that's what it is. And they're quite delicious, I mean, if you happen to like that. I mean, they're cut into little squares, for eating. I was still describing the place she lived. The spacious front yard was a large vegetable garden which Pascual cared for, grew, and they had corn and squash and tomatoes and everything in the front yard. And then there were also a couple of wonderful old fig trees which had these big black figs. And so the front was a big garden, and the back where the chickens, usually a couple of ducks and maybe a couple of goats, were in the back. And it was just, it was like a miniature farm.
Wow.
Wonderful corn that I still remember many years later.
How old were you when you left Los Angeles?
Well, meantime, my life with my mother was in contrast to the life I had known with my auntie. She drank heavily. There were drunken parties. and everything that goes with heavy drinking. To the point that police would come Saturday nights when there would be wild parties. And during those years, I became very, as a teenager, I became very religious. I mean, religious in a way that my two aunties had not been. I mean, they were just ordinarily religious, deeply religious, but I became involved in a couple of Pentecostal churches as a teenager, and spent a lot of time in those churches with the kids who also went to those churches.
How did you happen to get involved in that, or what drew
I
you
guess I
into
met the kids at school, I suppose. And so they were friends of mine, and they went to these kind of gospel type churches. And you know, there was a whole business of accepting Jesus as your personal savior and that kind of thing.
No snakes? No snakes?
No snakes, no snakes.
And how long did you continue with that religion?
Well, when I was about 17, I decided that I wanted to leave my mother, and I had talked with my auntie, who, with her husband, who was a Methodist minister in Arizona, said that I could come and live with them.
Your Aunt Isabel or different?
No, yeah, my Auntie Isabel with she had meantime back at the farm she had married, she had a husband who was a Methodist minister, and she had one child, and they were very poor because it was the Mexican Methodist church in Tempe, Arizona. There was also a well-to-do white Methodist church in Tempe, which was very nice, you know, had a nice parsonage and a nice big church. And the Mexican church was in the Mexican section of town, which didn't have any paved streets or sidewalks, and had indented lawns because of the weather there, so they would fill the canals with water, and I don't know if it was a couple of times a month. The lawn area of each house was about 2 feet lower than the surrounding area, so that maybe it was once a week or once every 2 weeks, they would open the floodgates and the water would pour in, so the front yard would become a lake. And that was the way that they kept the lawn growing in that kind of weather, extremely hot weather. I guess it was the weather that I've never seen that anyplace else. Anyway, so I moved in to live with her and her husband and her little daughter. And I went to my last year of high school and first year of college. It was in a college town at Arizona, Tempe, Arizona, State Teachers College.
And you went there for 1 year to college?
Yes. And at the end of the year, the Dean of Women who happened to be from the Midwest, was going back for the summer to Chicago. And she said that a couple of students, including me, could go back with her if we wanted to and find a job in Chicago, because there were no jobs in Arizona.
Uh-huh.
It was still hard times.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that, and I stayed in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And
Was this during the war or still during the Depression?
well, it was during the war.
Uh-huh.
And I went to I think it was because she knew the president of the college. I went to George Williams College, which actually had begun as a YMCA college.
Mm-hmm.
And I lived there. They had a dormitory. I lived there. And at the end of the first year that I was there, the military needed a place for I think it actually was sailors, and they appealed to the administration of the school to have the students housed in the community and let the sailors, let the Navy personnel live in our dormitory.
Uh-huh.
So it was at that time that the administration of the school negotiated with the owner of a large old house in the neighborhood for us students to live in, to move out, so that the Navy could move in and take over the dormitory. And in that process, the school administration entered into a restrictive covenant with the owner of that residence. And I assume that everybody still knows what a restrictive covenant was, but in case you don't remember, it was an agreement between the owner of the house and some group in the neighborhood that they would rent only to white students, so that the students of color at George Williams College, which is where we were going, would not have a place to live.
Mm-hmm.
And that became an issue between a group of students, including myself, in which we approached the administration and asked that they revoke the restrictive covenant. And they refused to do it. And in the process of the fight that went on between the students and the administration, I was expelled from school.
Oh.
So in looking for a place a replacement, a school replacement, I found the downtown YMCA college, which at the time was in open revolt because the YMCA had racial quotas like 10% for Jews, and I don't know which percentage for black people. And there was, in the process, I entered the YMCA college, but in the process, the students began to revolt, and about 90% of the students and 75% of the faculty of the downtown YMCA revolted and left the college because of their racism, and started a new college, which was called Roosevelt University. And it was from Roosevelt that I finally graduated from undergraduate school. Minga, yeah, yes.
Come in.
What?